You know, it's funny. It's funny that no one in your life has ever taught you what goodness is. Isn't that amazing? None of your teachers, none of your professors, all your fancy degrees and bachelor's degrees and master's degrees and PhDs and all these experts and all your physics and all the scientists, and still no one can give you a simple explanation for what goodness is. Well, here it is. You've come to the right place. Even in many spiritual teachings, I notice that they don't really talk about goodness. They don't explain what it is. And I think that's because many of these teachers simply aren't directly conscious of absolute good. They may be awakened in various kinds of ways, but they're not deeply conscious of the absolute good that is a facet of the ultimate awakening. Which is why I think that a lot of times it's not talked about in many spiritual traditions, like in non-duality teachings of certain kinds, in neo-Advaita teachings, in Advaita teachings of certain kinds, it's not talked about. Of course, in other teachings it is talked about, so it varies. But good is not merely just a human thing. It's not just a human quality, and it's not just a human invention, and it's not purely a relative thing. Even though, of course, mostly when people talk about good and bad, they're talking about relative good and bad. They're talking about the duality of good and bad. This is not what I mean when I say goodness. When I say goodness, I'm talking about goodness with a capital G, absolute good. That exists. And you can become directly conscious of what that is. This is not a belief. This is not an ideology. This is not a speculation. This is not a philosophy. This is something you can become directly conscious of. And I'll just share the conclusions of my own conscious realizations with you in the hope of inspiring you to pursue these realizations for yourself so that one day you can have these realizations of goodness for yourself. And good is it's sort of like an unscientific concept, you might say. Like if I try to tell a scientist that the ultimate nature of reality is absolute goodness, the scientist will say, no, that's just some hippie nonsense. That just sounds good to you, Leo. That's like some wishful thinking, bro. Like you've been smoking too much weed or something. But I mean, this is not some sort of tangible, quantifiable, formalizable thing like some equation. So there's that kind of bias there. Notice, again, this is one of those tricky, sneaky, metaphysical assumptions, hidden assumptions of science, is that reality must be neutral. And that if you think that reality is good, somehow you must be crazy. And then as the objection goes, well, Leo, if reality can be absolutely good, then what about absolute evil? Shouldn't it also be absolutely evil to balance it out? Well, it turns out not to be the case. And I'll explain why in a minute. And even under some Buddhist conceptions of reality and Advaitin conceptions of reality, there's also sort of this assumption that consciousness must just be neutral, not good. Well, there is such a thing as absolute goodness. I've become directly conscious of it for myself. You can as well. What you can become directly conscious of is that physical reality is the material realization of absolute good. Physical reality, all of it, the physical universe as you know it, is the very embodiment of absolute good. It's not neutral, it's absolute good. Why, you might wonder? How can this possibly be the case? Sounds kind of crazy, sounds kind of loony. Why would reality be good and not neutral? Consider that all of the stuff that you consider bad is actually just a consequence of the way that you judge reality. I mean, that's literally what bad is. It's a judgment that you project onto reality. Can you see that? A lot of people can't see this. They think that bad is somehow baked into the physical structure of reality, as though like theft is actually bad, or murder is actually bad, or genocide is actually bad. But if you're truly unbiased in the way that you look at reality, you can kind of step back from the situation. You can see that actually it's not bad. The badness that is there is something I'm projecting into it because it's bad for me. It's bad from my point of view. It's bad because I have various sorts of attachments to how life should unfold. I believe there shouldn't be theft. I believe there shouldn't be rape. I believe there shouldn't be murder. And of course, why do I believe these things? Not because they're absolutely bad. I believe these things because all these things are threatening to my own survival. Pretty obvious, right? But then you might wonder, here's where it gets kind of tricky, because you might then think, okay, well, Leo, if that's true, then shouldn't goodness just also work in the same way? That goodness is just also a projection of the human mind. And it's also just, from a certain point of view, like maybe you think that sex is good, children are good, pleasure is good, food is good, the kind that you like. I mean, whatever you think is good. Being nice to people, you might say, is good. Charity is good. Giving donations to the hungry is good. These sorts of things. And you might say, well, Leo, isn't that all a projection of, again, this sort of biased mind? And you're right, it is. Those are projections, because you're selecting certain things to be good relative to other things which are not good. So, giving donations to children you think is good, whereas abusing children you think is bad. So here we're dealing with good as a lowercase g good, relative good. And this is a projection of the human mind. But then what people don't realize is that there is absolute good. Absolute good transcends and includes both of the relative good and bad. So in a sense, what happens is that your consciousness expands and becomes so holistic and so integrated that you gain enough meta-awareness to realize that, yes, the bad stuff is just a projection of a biased mind for survival purposes. Yes, the lowercase g good stuff is also a projection of the selfish, biased mind for survival purposes, because usually what the ego calls lowercase g good is simply that which serves the ego. So you're clear about that. But then what happens is that you break through to a meta-consciousness of the entire dynamic as a whole, all of reality as a whole, and you see that from that ultimate absolute point of view, it's all absolute good. Good with a uppercase G. And here you realize that good is not just some human thing. Good is a deep existential facet of ultimate truth, of what consciousness is. Consciousness is goodness. And consciousness is all that there is, as we've talked about many times before. The nature of consciousness is good, and everything else is just a subset of that. Everything else serves the ultimate good. So why would reality itself and consciousness itself be the ultimate good? Think about it. If you had unlimited power to create any kind of reality that you could create, of all the possible ones that you could create, what kind would you create that would be the highest good out of all the possible ones? The answer is you would give an infinite number of beings the opportunity to experience and discover the infinite goodness of consciousness for themselves. That would be the ultimate good, is if you created a reality like that. And here we are. We are in that reality. Since reality is a singularity, an infinite singularity, since it is one, there is only one reality and can only ever be one reality, that one reality has to be at the ultimate absolute level, has to be its own source and its own end, its own goal and its own point. So what is the point of reality, you might say? Well, the point of reality is, of course, just itself. And what is the point of goodness? The point of goodness is itself. Goodness is the one thing that is its own reward. See, you don't do good things to get something else. You do other things to reach the good. Like money by itself is not good, because you can use money for all sorts of bad stuff. But goodness is good in and of itself. That's the special property of goodness that allows it to hold this absolute position amongst everything else. So imagine, if you will, an entire universe in which nothing but good existed. Why wouldn't God create such a universe if God had infinite power? Well, of course, that's exactly what God would do. Now you wonder, well, why didn't God do that? But of course God did. Here we are. Ta-da! This is it. You're sitting inside of it. You are it. This is absolute good. What this means is it's not possible for there to be a universe that's any better than the one that exists. This is the ultimate one. The difficulty, though, here is that you do not have sufficient consciousness to understand infinite goodness. Your definition of infinite goodness is corrupted by your lack of consciousness and by your selfishness and all of your biases and judgments. You see, that's the problem. You think that God made a mistake in the design of the universe because here you are in the universe, this finite creature, moving around, walking around, doing stuff, and stuff doesn't go your way. But that's only because you're so self-centered and you're expecting a good universe to be that which satisfies all of your selfish needs. But of course, if the universe was structured like that, that wouldn't be a good universe, that would be an evil universe. Because it would suit you, but it wouldn't suit all the other infinite creatures and beings in the universe. That would be a selfish universe. Instead, what we actually have is we have a completely selfless universe. A selfless universe is one which is not biased towards any one individual being or creature. It's completely neutral in that it treats all beings and creatures equally in a certain sense. It doesn't privilege anyone. It doesn't put anyone on a pedestal above any other one. Even though, of course, certain creatures have more abilities than other creatures. That, of course, that's obvious. But that doesn't mean that, like, for example, a human is better than a donkey just because the human can do calculus and a donkey can't. No, they're both equally good as far as the universe is concerned. The universe is treating everyone like a perfect judge would in a courtroom. You know, if you had the perfect judge in the perfect courtroom, he would treat both defendant and the plaintiff equally without any kind of bias or prejudice. And that's exactly what God does with all of his creatures. But in so doing, you see the problem from an individual creature's point of view, which is where you're sitting there looking at this thing from an individual creature's point of view, from an individual human point of view, a lot of times it doesn't seem fair what the judge is doing. And the problem is that because you're so selfish, you will project your own selfishness and bias and judgments onto the judge, and you will think that the judge is making some sort of error in his judgments because he's not siding with you, because you want the judge to side with you, because you're selfish. And of course, if the judge did side with you for some sort of biased, partial reason that wasn't part of the truth, then that would be a bad judge. That would be an evil judge. That would be a corrupt judge. But that's precisely what you want. See, you don't really want a good judge when you go into a courtroom. What you really want is you want a judge who's corrupt in your favor, who will favor you, who's partial towards your side. Because you don't care about the truth, you care about winning. And you care about winning because you care about survival. So from your point of view, it seems like the universe has a lot of bad stuff in it. Actually, it doesn't. The universe is absolutely good, but you need to have enough perspective and meta-awareness and distance in order to be able to see that. You can't see that from your little egoic, self-centered perspective. One of the most profound realizations you can have in your life, in this work that we're doing, is to realize that only good can exist. Nothing else can exist. In fact, existence is goodness. They're synonymous. They're identical. There's nothing bad that's ever happened in the entire universe. It's all only good. If you have infinite consciousness to see all the goodness. If your consciousness is less than infinite, you won't be able to see and appreciate all of the goodness, because infinite goodness requires infinite consciousness, because actually they're the same thing. They're identical. Any consciousness which is less than infinite is going to be partial and is not going to be infinitely good. Non-goodness is literally impossible for the universe, other than as a illusion or as a misperception of the universe. So anytime you look into the universe and you see something that you don't like and you think it isn't good, really you think that that's because God made a mistake in the construction of the universe. Actually, it's you who's making the mistake in perceiving that part of the universe. You don't see how that part fits into all the other parts and adds up to absolute goodness. See, because your perspective is always finite, it's missing how all the finite pieces interconnect into infinite goodness. So to see the absolute good requires infinite perception. You need to literally be able to see how every piece fits together and serves the larger whole. If you're looking at individual local areas of the universe, then yeah, it'll seem like you're seeing bad stuff. But really, all that bad stuff, if you zoom out far enough, you will see how it plays into the ultimate goodness of everything.